pregnant wife was in labor, the millionaire was at dinner in a luxury restaurant with his mistress. They say love can survive anything until betrayal shatters trust at its very foundation. On a stormy night in Manhattan, millionaire real estate mogul Alexander Harrington found himself at an opulent restaurant, sipping fine wine under candlelight. Seated across from him was not his beloved wife, Victoria, but a captivating, dark-haired beauty, his mistress, Isabella Moretti. Meanwhile, just a few miles away at Redwood Memorial Hospital, Victoria clutched her stomach in labor, gasping with both pain and heartbreak. Secrets, lies, and the weight of a decades-long family empire threatened to unravel as new life emerged. This is their shocking, tangled story of love and ruin. Alexander Harrington had grown up in a world where fortunes were made and lost with the flick of a pen. His father, the venerable Edward Harrington, had been a legend in real estate circles, an old money patriarch known for developing entire neighborhoods across the eastern seaboard. From the moment Alexander was born, expectations loomed over him like watchful gargoyles perched atop the family mansion. He was educated in the finest private schools in New York, sent abroad for college to the University of Oxford, and then fast-tracked into Harrington Holdings as soon as he returned. People called him America's darling prince in society pages because of the philanthropic galas he hosted and the impossibly expensive suits he wore. By 35, Alexander was a fixture in the city's elite circles. Victoria Morland, soon to be Victoria Harrington, had met him on an unusually sultry winter evening at a charity ball. She was introduced to him by a mutual friend, Leonard Winston, a well-known attorney in Manhattan who represented half of the city's wealthiest families. Victoria, raised in a middle-class family in upstate New York, was different from the usual socialite swarm around Alexander. Her quiet grace, her passion for wildlife conservation, and her refusal to be dazzled by his fortune caught his attention. They were married within a year, a grand affair at the historic St. Patrick's Cathedral. Society watchers and tabloids swooned over their apparent fairy tale romance. Their honeymoon in the Maldives was plastered all over Instagram crystal clear waters, private beaches, and a massive diamond ring sparkling on Victoria's hand. She was the envy of many, and Alexander, always composed, beamed with satisfaction at the life he was building. But fairy tales can hide unseen cracks. Beneath Alexander's polished surface was a man struggling to be worthy of his father's intimidating legacy. Buried beneath Victoria's gentleness was a fear that she was merely playing a role in someone else's story. In the early days of their marriage, those anxieties quietly festered, never spoken aloud. The staff at the Harrington estate often whispered about tense silences between the couple, fleeting moments of coldness in Alexander's gaze. When Victoria announced her pregnancy, it seemed to spark a renewed warmth in their home. Alexander began coming home earlier, occasionally skipping after work cocktails to cook with her, though cooking often meant him standing beside her at the kitchen island, sipping a vintage Cabernet, chatting about his day while a private chef discreetly prepared dinner. For a few precious months, it was as if a golden light embraced them. They shared baby name ideas, visited the best obstetricians, and turned the old library on the second floor into a nursery. Alexander painted the walls himself in a soft lilac shade that Victoria picked out. Neither of them, however, fully understood the storms building just over the horizon. Sometimes illusions are easier to maintain when life is calm, but illusions always shatter when the storms arrive, and on the night Victoria went into labor, the tempest would be merciless. It had started innocently, or at least that's what Alexander told himself, a real estate conference in Rome, an after-party in a centuries-old palazzo. Alexander, wearing a tailored tuxedo, had found himself introduced to Isabella Moretti, a striking Italian-American interior designer with an international clientele. She was confident, elegant, and bold, the kind of woman who spoke her mind without apology. They discussed a potential collaboration on a new luxury condo project Alexander was spearheading in Chelsea, the conversation laced with subtle flirtation. He found her black curls mesmerizing, and the way she carried herself like a woman who walked into a room expecting it to rearrange itself around her stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. In the months that followed, their work-related meetings turned into long dinners. First, Alexander justified it as building a professional connection. Isabella had a brilliant design perspective, and they wanted to merge their styles for cutting-edge real estate projects. Over time, the conversation bled into personal territory anecdotes about growing up, about unfulfilled dreams, about the pressures of maintaining outward perfection. Isabella had grown up in a turbulent household in Venice, then emigrated to the United States at 15. She was fiercely independent, forging her own path in a male-dominated industry. When Victoria was around 7 months pregnant, Alexander realized he was texting Isabella at odd hours. Phone calls laced with jokes, shared frustrations about deadlines, and personal tidbits. Though he told himself it was merely friendship, deep down, guilt pricked his heart. He noticed how Victoria's gentle smiles couldn't dispel the restlessness he felt with Isabella. A quiet part of him came alive whenever the interior designer's name lit up his phone. Word traveled fast among New York's elite. People saw them having drinks at expensive bars or stepping out of black town cars in front of exclusive restaurants. At first, the rumor mill struggled to figure it out. Was Alexander meeting with a new business partner, or was there more to it? The staff at Harrington Holdings exchanged glances and half-formed whispers. A friend of Victoria's overheard a conversation about that new designer who seemed suspiciously close to Alexander. Then the whispers drifted to Victoria's ears. Always the trusting spouse, she initially brushed them aside. She believed in Alexander. She trusted that fatherhood had softened him, that his days of chasing fleeting thrills were behind him. Yet, as each day passed, an uneasy sensation took hold. She never confronted him openly. She didn't want to accuse him based on gossip. Instead, she watched, eyes wide open, heart pounding, waiting for any sign that these rumors were real. But Alexander was a master at deflection. His father had taught him long ago to never show weakness, to keep a pristine image, even if the reality was crumbling. He would come home with extravagant gifts for Victoria, shower her with attention. Still, late-night texts, unplanned business dinners, and a creeping emotional distance did not lie. The flicker of suspicion in Victoria's eyes grew stronger. Unspoken tension thickened in the penthouse, weaving an invisible barrier between them. Weeks became a countdown to the baby's due date. Alexander tried to reassure himself he could keep both worlds separate, that his fleeting adventure with Isabella was just that, fleeting. But some storms refused to be diverted. On the night Victoria went into labor, a fierce wind howled across the city. Rain pelted the skyscrapers, thunder rolling ominously. Clouds gathered in dark clusters, as though the heavens themselves sensed the drama unraveling below. Victoria had been resting on the velvet couch in the penthouse's living room when the first contraction took hold. The pain was immediate, sharp, and far stronger than the Braxton Hicks contractions she had experienced before. She tried calling for Alexander, expecting him to be in his study or possibly asleep. Instead, she was met with echoing silence. A wave of apprehension washed over her, and in that heightened state of anxiety, another contraction rippled through her abdomen. Her hands shook as she dialed Alexander's phone. No answer. She tried again, straight to voicemail. Panic laced her every breath. Their doorman, Hector, helped Victoria into the waiting limousine the Harringtons kept on standby. She was half doubled over in pain, breath ragged, tears of both fear and heartbreak on her cheeks. Where was Alexander? Meanwhile, on the other side of Manhattan's elite social world, Alexander Harrington was at a private dining room inside La Tour d'Elegance, an exclusive French restaurant that booked months in advance unless, of course, you were Alexander Harrington. Seated across from him was Isabella Moretti, dressed in a sleek black gown that hugged her every curve. A scattering of candles flickered on the table, illuminating the tension between them. Alexander had felt uneasy about the dinner the entire day. Something in him knew he should be home, especially with Victoria's due date so close. But Isabella had insisted they needed to finalize details of a new project. Then dinner turned into an intimate conversation about the future. He found himself sipping fine Bordeaux, transfixed by Isabella's sultry voice and daring gaze. Guilt simmered in the back of his mind, but desire and curiosity reigned. His phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. Twice. Then again. He ignored it. After all, how many times had it rung during important business meetings, only to be a trivial matter? Then it buzzed in a long, urgent manner, an indication of an incoming call from a designated emergency contact. Finally, he fished it out, only to see 3 missed calls and a flurry of urgent texts from an unknown number. "This is Redwood Memorial. Your wife is in labor. Please contact us immediately." The color drained from Alexander's face. He muttered a shocked expletive, shoving his chair back so suddenly that it nearly toppled over. Without looking at Isabella, he grabbed his coat and bolted for the exit. His mind churned with panic. His mistress called after him, but Alexander's world had narrowed down to a single point: his wife in labor, alone. As he sped through the rain-lashed streets, the realization that he might lose everything, his marriage, his child, his reputation, gnawed at him. No matter how fast the car raced, he couldn't escape the sinking dread that maybe, just maybe, he had already gone too far. When Alexander finally arrived at Redwood Memorial Hospital, he was drenched from the sprint across the parking lot. The smell of antiseptic and the harsh fluorescent lighting struck him as mercilessly real. The adrenaline pounding in his veins made each step feel heavier, as if destiny itself weighed him down with guilt. He rushed to the reception desk, nearly breathless. "My wife, Victoria Harrington," he managed. The receptionist glanced up, recognized his face. It was plastered in enough society pages, then discreetly nodded, gesturing for him to follow a nurse. They led him down sterile hallways to the maternity ward, where shouts and cries mingled with the whir of medical equipment. Outside the delivery room, he was stopped by Dr. Felicity Inna, the obstetrician who had been overseeing Victoria's pregnancy from the start. She wore a grave expression. "Alexander," she began, voice low. "Victoria's condition is stable, but her blood pressure is dangerously high. She's been asking for you." The words landed on Alexander like a physical blow. High blood pressure? Preeclampsia? The baby? A swirl of terrifying possibilities clamored in his head. He wanted to be in that room immediately, to hold his wife's hand, to promise her everything would be all right. He stepped inside. The sight of Victoria, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes, tore at his heart. She was hooked up to the 4th monitors, beeping in anxious rhythms. Her face twisted in pain with another contraction. For a moment, guilt nearly paralyzed him. "Alexander," she gasped when she saw him. There was relief in her eyes, but also something else: hurt, confusion, and a vulnerability he had never witnessed. As he reached her side, he saw the cell phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. She had tried calling, texting, and eventually resorted to the hospital staff. He stroked her hair, whispering apologetic words, although no apology could erase his betrayal. "I'm here now," he murmured. "I'm so sorry." Her voice trembled. "Where were you?" He hesitated. Could he lie again? Could he craft another excuse about a business meeting that ran late? One look at her pain-filled eyes told him no. I was at dinner with a client," he offered, half lie, half truth. Pain seized Victoria's features again as a fierce contraction racked her body. A nurse stepped in, urging Alexander to remain calm, to focus on helping her breathe. Over the next hour, the tension in the room became a background hum, overshadowed by the intensity of labor. As she screamed and pushed, the unstoppable momentum toward parenthood forced Alexander into a strange clarity. This was his wife, giving birth to his child, forging life while he had been indulging in illusions at a candle-lit dinner table. When their baby's cries finally echoed through the room, the storm outside raged on. Alexander cut the umbilical cord. A baby girl, tiny, fragile, and utterly perfect, entered the world that night, unaware of the emotional chaos swirling among the adults. Alexander's heart swelled at the sight of his daughter, but fear coiled around him too. He was a father now, and he had betrayed the person who trusted him most, right when she needed him the most. After a flurry of medical checks and paperwork, Victoria was transferred to a private room, the baby nestled in her arms. She looked exhausted, drained from the ordeal. The machines around her beeped in steady reassurance that mother and child were recovering, but the tension between husband and wife crackled like electricity. Alexander hovered, wanting to be near them, yet feeling unworthy. He softly touched the baby's cheek, delicate, pink, and full of promise. The child, whom they had decided to name Aurora, slept soundly, oblivious to the sorrow in her mother's eyes. At length, Victoria spoke, her voice low and raw from hours of labor. "I needed you tonight," she said without looking at him. I called so many times." Alexander swallowed, taking a seat by the bed. "I'm sorry, He couldn't finish. The truth was monstrous, looming between them. Saying he was sorry felt woefully inadequate. Victoria closed her eyes, tears slipping down her temples. She was too tired to press the issue. Her questions would have to wait. For now, she tried to lose herself in the wonder of her newborn daughter. Yet, the seeds of doubt had been planted, their roots stretching into her heart. He hadn't been there, and she knew deep inside that dinner with a client was hardly the whole story. In the days that followed, visitors poured into the hospital room, friends, colleagues, even a few reporters fishing for a photo of New York's newest little heiress. Victoria tried to hold on to the happiness of her baby's arrival, but each time she glanced at Alexander, that gnawing suspicion twisted inside. She noticed him checking his phone frequently, stepping out for hushed calls. When a nurse overheard him mentioning Isabella, a name that had circulated in rumor, Victoria's doubts solidified into terrifying certainty. Alexander, for his part, battled with the desire to come clean versus the instinct to hide behind more lies. Each moment he spent with Aurora made him want to be a better man. Yet, he felt entangled by guilt and the complexity of his affair with Isabella. He'd never intended to replace Victoria or jeopardize his family. He'd simply craved some intangible spark. Yet that spark now threatened to burn everything he loved to the ground. By the time Victoria was discharged, a storm of emotional conflict churned beneath the glossy surfaces they presented to the world. They returned to the Harrington penthouse, the nursery meticulously prepared, the staff cooing over the new baby. Photographers snapped pictures of the radiant new mother stepping out of their chauffeured car with Alexander beside her, smiling for the cameras. But behind closed doors, not even the luxurious trappings of their lifestyle could hold at bay the tension mounting between them. Victoria held Aurora close, comforting herself with the unconditional love of a newborn. Alexander stood in the doorway of the nursery, feeling like an uninvited guest in his own home. The silence between them grew, pregnant with unspoken accusations and unvoiced confessions. 3 weeks passed in uneasy limbo. Victoria focused on her recovery and caring for Aurora, who was a quiet baby rarely fussing, content to gaze at her mother with inquisitive eyes. Late at night, alone in the nursery's rocking chair, Victoria pondered the distance forming between her and Alexander. He was always out at meetings or inspecting properties. He came home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He offered half-hearted excuses, claiming he'd brushed up against someone in an elevator or that it was the lingering scent of one of his colleagues. One evening, Victoria mustered her courage. After laying Aurora down to sleep, she found Alexander sipping whiskey in his office, staring at spreadsheets on his laptop. She noticed his tense posture, the faint slump in his shoulders as if he bore a weight too heavy to carry. "Alexander," she said quietly. Her voice made him jump, so lost in his thoughts that he hadn't heard her approach. "We need to talk." He closed the laptop slowly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. For a moment he seemed too tired to argue. "Yes," he agreed, "we do." The conversation that followed was raw, painful, and filled with tears on Victoria's side and tortured silence on Alexander's. She demanded the truth. Who was Isabella Moretti? Was he having an affair? Why had he lied about being at dinner with a mere client while his own wife was giving birth? Alexander couldn't meet her gaze. "I never meant for it to happen," he finally confessed, voice hoarse. "Isabella and it started as a business arrangement. Then it got complicated." Victoria's knuckles whitened as she gripped the back of a chair. Complicated. The word sounded like acid in her mouth. "I was alone in the hospital, Alexander. Alone, giving birth to our daughter." He raised a trembling hand, raking it through his hair. "I know, I'm sorry, I've been an idiot. I was scared of our future, the responsibility, losing the spark." "I don't know." He let out a ragged sigh, eyes clouded with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you." Her anger, heartbreak, and sense of betrayal swirled into a single force. She felt tears burning at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You never wanted to hurt me," she repeated, half mocking, half devastated. "Yet you betrayed us right at the moment you were needed most." He tried to approach her, but she stepped back. "Don't," she warned, voice cracking. "I don't know if I can look at you the same way again." Torn between desperation and guilt, Alexander reached for her hand, but Victoria fled the room. As the door closed, he sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Outside, the city lights winked indifferently, the same city that had fueled his ambitions and passions. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Harrington realized ambition and passion weren't enough to fill the gaping hole his betrayal had created. In the aftermath of their confrontation, both Alexander and Victoria found themselves retreating into private reflections. Where had it all gone wrong? For Alexander, flashes of memory assaulted him. His father's stern lectures about discipline, about upholding the Harrington name, echoed in his mind. Edward Harrington had never specifically talked about fidelity or love. He believed in duty, legacy, and the carefully orchestrated dance of high society. Feelings were a liability, weaknesses that exposed you to potential scandal. From a young age, Alexander learned to compartmentalize. Even with Victoria, he never fully revealed his fears or insecurities, opting instead to shield her from the weight of family pressures. He remembered the day he first met Victoria, her laugh like tinkling bells, her warm eyes so trusting, and the way she admired the city skyline with childlike wonder. Why had he allowed himself to stray from that memory? In the hush of his solitary nights, he admitted that it wasn't Victoria who had changed, it was he, drawn like a moth to a destructive flame with Isabella. Victoria, meanwhile, wrestled with her own recollections. She recalled the moment she told Alexander she was pregnant, the flash of joy in his eyes, the tender kisses he showered on her belly in the weeks that followed. She had felt safe, cherished. Now that security had vanished. In its place was a raw, open wound. She'd grown up with modest means, seeing her parents struggle to maintain a loving household despite financial hardships. She had always believed love conquered all, but how could love survive this sort of betrayal? She tried to keep her composure for Aurora's sake. The baby sensed her mother's tension, fussing more than usual. Late one night, as Victoria cradled Aurora against her chest, she let tears fall silently. Her heartbreak pulsed in every breath. This was supposed to be a joyous time, a new chapter for their family. Instead, she felt alone in a penthouse full of staff, nurses, and the ghost of a marriage she feared was irreparably broken. Days slipped by in a haze of polite avoidance. Alexander left the apartment early for work, returning late, sometimes smelling faintly of Isabella's perfume. Victoria became adept at hiding her tears from the staff and from the cameras whenever she left the building with Aurora. The tabloids praised her post-baby glow, oblivious to the storm raging beneath, but gossip columns began to swirl with suspicion. Paparazzi had snapped photos of Alexander and Isabella stepping out of an art gallery late at night. Tongues wagged about how the Harrington marriage might be on the rocks. Victoria tried to block out the noise, but it was relentless. Family friends texted her carefully worded messages of concern. Even Leonard Winston, the lawyer friend who'd introduced them so long ago, offered discreet support, but she wasn't ready to trust anyone. Not yet. Both Alexander and Victoria found themselves trapped in a vicious cycle of regret, fear, and pride. Neither knew how to breach the widening chasm. They were strangers living under the same roof, orbiting around their innocent daughter who remained blissfully unaware of the emotional battleground she was born into. Despite her heartbreak, Victoria realized she had no time for paralysis. She was a mother now, and Aurora's welfare took precedence over her personal anguish. She began to see a counselor, Dr. Harriet Blackwood, who specialized in high society marriages and the unique pressures they faced. Initially, Victoria hesitated to reveal too much, wary of scandal, but Dr. Blackwood's gentle demeanor and professional ethics gradually coaxed out her fears and resentments. In the quiet, soft-lit office, Victoria learned a crucial lesson. Healing might or might not include her husband, but it had to include herself. If Alexander wasn't ready to acknowledge his wrongdoing fully and break off his affair, Victoria needed to prepare for the possibility of raising Aurora without the fairy tale marriage she once envisioned. She confided her struggles to one of her oldest friends, Emma Castle, who lived a relatively simple life upstate, far removed from the swirling gossip of Manhattan. Emma's advice was straightforward: follow your instincts. If you can forgive him and he wants to change, you'll both need time and mutual effort. But if he won't let go of this mistress, then you must do what's best for you and Aurora. With renewed determination, Victoria began setting boundaries. She refused to sleep in the same room with Alexander. She insisted he refrain from scheduling dinners alone with Isabella. She made a list of demands for marriage counseling: full transparency with finances and phone records, and no contact with Isabella unless it was strictly unavoidable for business. While these might seem harsh, Dr. Blackwood assured Victoria that boundaries were necessary for trust to even have a chance of rebuilding. Confronted with these ultimatums, Alexander was defensive at first. He resented the intrusiveness of Victoria, wanting access to his phone and emails. But a flicker of remorse also drove him to comply. Part of him longed to save his marriage, to not be the man who tore his family apart. Yet, he also struggled with lingering feelings for Isabella and the fear that ending that relationship might close the door on something he still found intoxicating. Seeing Victoria's new backbone unsettled him. The timid, gentle woman he'd once known had found an iron will. She was calm, methodical, and fiercely protective of Aurora. Even in his self-absorbed haze, he recognized this shift as a reflection of her unconditional love for their daughter, and maybe even for him, if he could earn it back. Under the guidance of Dr. Blackwood, Alexander and Victoria began a tense dance. They navigated couples therapy sessions, which often ended in tears or anger. They tried to craft a sense of normalcy for Aurora's sake, attending her medical checkups together, posing for family photos that were featured in a society magazine, albeit with forced smiles. All the while, the shadow of Isabella Moretti loomed large, and the question remained, was Alexander truly committed to rebuilding his marriage, or was he clinging to illusions he couldn't bear to shatter? Isabella Moretti was no stereotype. She wasn't a scheming gold digger, nor did she see herself as a homewrecker. In her perspective, she and Alexander had stumbled upon each other at a time when both were looking for something more. He was disillusioned with the expectations of fatherhood and a perfect marriage, while she was tired of her solitary battle to climb the ranks in a male-dominated field. Still, morality doesn't bow to justifications. As weeks stretched into months and Alexander grew increasingly distant, Isabella felt a rising sense of frustration. She had believed him when he said he was unhappy, that he felt caged. But seeing him waver one foot in his marriage, the other foot in her bed eroded her patience. She wasn't content to be a secret any longer. Late one night, Isabella summoned Alexander to her upscale Tribeca loft. The space reflected her design aesthetic, sleek lines, warm lighting, and tasteful sculptures that hinted at her Venetian heritage. Alexander arrived, tension etched across his brow. He knew this conversation was overdue. "Where do we stand?" Isabella asked, crossing her arms. "Because I can't live in limbo forever. Either you end this or commit." Her words echoed with urgency. She had no illusions about the gravity of what they were doing. If they continued, Alexander's marriage might disintegrate. If he chose to stay in that marriage, she would be left picking up the pieces of her heart. Alexander hesitated, rubbing his temples. "Victoria is the mother of my child," he said, almost pleading. "I can't just abandon them, but I also have feelings for you, Isabella." She rolled her eyes, frustration fueling her. "Feelings? That's not enough. Do you see a life with me? Or are you just afraid to lose your reputation?" His silence was deafening. In that moment, Isabella saw through his polished veneer to the conflicted soul underneath. She realized he might love her in a certain way, but his sense of responsibility and the fear of scandal loomed larger. "You need to choose," she said, voice trembling with emotion she tried to conceal. "I won't be your afterthought." Alexander tried to hold her, to reassure her, but she pushed him away. Tears glistened in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She directed him to the door, quietly but firmly. As he left, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. Could he truly walk away from Isabella and remain loyal to Victoria, or was he fooling himself, thinking he could salvage one relationship without fully letting go of the other? Meanwhile, Isabella collapsed onto her designer sofa, burying her face in her hands. She replayed every moment, the stolen kisses, whispered confessions, and now this anguished standoff. In the distance, the lights of the city glowed, as if mocking the darkness enveloping her. Whatever the outcome, she knew she was done, waiting in the shadows. As Aurora's first few months passed, the Harringtons' life remained a precarious balancing act. Alexander danced between his contrition at home and his unresolved feelings for Isabella. Victoria poured her energy into motherhood, therapy, and cautious hope. An unexpected catalyst arrived in the form of an invitation. Leonard Winston, the lawyer who'd introduced Alexander and Victoria years ago, was hosting a philanthropic gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was to be a glittering evening, powerful patrons, world-class art, and discreet fundraising behind the scenes. Normally, Alexander and Victoria would attend these events hand in hand, the picture-perfect couple. This time, though, tension simmered at the prospect of facing the public. On the night of the gala, Victoria was stunning in an emerald green gown that highlighted her newfound aura of strength. Alexander, in a classic black tuxedo, felt a pang of pride and longing as he watched her get ready. She looked like the same beautiful woman he'd fallen in love with, yet there was a resolute distance in her eyes. They arrived together, stepping out of the limo onto a red carpet lined with photographers. Flashbulbs illuminated them, capturing smiles that both had learned to fake expertly. Inside the museum, they mingled with high-profile guests, exchanging pleasantries about the new baby. Yet, every so often, Alexander's gaze darted around, half fearing and half hoping to see Isabella. His heart clenched when he spotted her across the room. She wore a midnight blue gown that complemented her dark curls. She noticed him almost instantly. Their eyes locked in a silent exchange, loaded with unresolved feelings. Victoria sensed the tension. She followed her husband's line of sight and saw Isabella's gaze. In that instant, the facade cracked. Victoria felt a surge of anger and pain, and her composure nearly slipped. She was saved by Leonard, who approached with a bright smile, oblivious to the emotional chaos beneath the surface. As the evening progressed, Alexander tried to focus on small talk and charity matters, but eventually he found himself in a deserted corridor of the museum's Greek sculpture wing, face to face with Isabella. She looked at him with an unflinching stare, eyes reflecting both desire and heartbreak. "I can't keep doing this," she said softly. "You have to decide." Before Alexander could answer, a voice behind them startled them both. Victoria stood there, shoulders squared. She had been searching for Alexander, suspecting exactly what she found: her husband in a secluded conversation with the very woman rumored to be his mistress. The silent tension was thicker than stone. Isabella opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize or explain, but Victoria's glare stopped her. Alexander stepped forward, heart pounding. "Victoria," she raised her hand, palm outward, signaling him to stop. Her voice trembled with controlled rage. "So this is what it comes down to," she demanded, eyes flickering between them. "A meeting in the shadows? Are you both still lying to my face?" For a moment, none of them spoke. The weight of this confrontation pressed down on them like the ancient statues lining the corridor. The choice Alexander had been avoiding stood before him in full force. And in that sacred hush of the museum's marbled halls, the unraveling of their shared illusions reached its critical point. Every moment seemed suspended in time. The overhead spotlights cast long shadows across the floor, highlighting the tension etched on each face. Victoria's heart hammered in her chest, fueled by anger, betrayal, and a raw vulnerability she couldn't hide. Alexander took a shaky breath. "Victoria, please," he implored. He gestured for Isabella to leave, but Isabella stood firm, defiance in her eyes. "No," Victoria said, voice trembling. "I want to hear it from you, Alexander. Who is she to you? And what are you going to do about it?" He glanced at Isabella, then back at his wife. Silence thickened, threatening to suffocate them. Conflicting emotions warred within him: his desire for Isabella's passion, his responsibility to his wife and daughter, his longing for forgiveness, and his fear of societal scandal. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded distant to his own ears. She was my mistake. I never stopped caring for you, Victoria. I was just lost." Victoria's eyes glistened with tears. "A mistake," she repeated bitterly, turning to Isabella. "Did you know about me?" Isabella's cheeks flushed. "I knew he was married, yes, but I thought—" She paused, struggling for composure. "I thought he was leaving you. He led me to believe there was no future with you." Pain lanced through Victoria's chest. The weight of Alexander's deceit felt even heavier. She stepped back, tears brimming. "Alexander," she said, "if you want to try to save this marriage, you end it right here, right now, in front of me. No more lies. No more half-truths." Alexander turned to Isabella. The look on her face was a mixture of resignation and heartbreak. She understood what was coming, yet her eyes silently pleaded for him to choose differently. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice quavering. "I can't continue with you. I have to try to fix my marriage, be a father to my daughter." He put a hand on Isabella's arm, gently. "One last touch, goodbye." It was wrong. All of it. A single tear traced down Isabella's cheek. She said nothing else, only nodded once, before turning on her heel and walking away, her footsteps echoing in the grand corridor. She didn't look back. For Victoria, the moment felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life from the outside. Alexander had made his choice, but could she forgive him? And if she did, what would it take to heal her shattered trust? Alexander tried to approach her, but Victoria stepped away, as though his touch might burn her. "This is just the beginning, Alexander," she said, voice unsteady. "It doesn't fix the damage, and it doesn't erase the hurt. You'll have to prove that this is truly over. I won't be a fool twice." He nodded, a hollow ache filling his chest. "I know," he murmured. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." In the faint hush that followed, the hollow corridors of the Met Museum seemed to hold its breath, as though acknowledging that this single decision, painful yet necessary, would irreversibly shape their lives. In the weeks after the gala, Alexander cut all contact with Isabella. He sent a formal request to Harrington Holdings board to cease any personal project involvement with her firm. A messy, public dispute threatened, but Harrington Holdings ultimately paid her a hefty termination fee, effectively removing her from any direct collaboration with Alexander's business. Alexander had no illusions that this move would magically solve his marital problems. Trust is not a switch you can flick on. Each day, he woke early to help with Aurora's feedings, changed diapers without complaint, and gave Victoria space when she needed it. He continued going to therapy, both individual sessions and couples counseling with Dr. Blackwood. In those sessions, he peeled back layers of guilt, fear, and entitlement. He recognized how his father's teachings about power and image had shaped him, leading him to see relationships as assets or liabilities rather than human bonds requiring empathy and care. Victoria, for her part, struggled with a whirlwind of emotions. Some days she felt hope watching Alexander cradle Aurora or talk earnestly in therapy. Other days she burned with resentment, replaying the betrayal over and over. Nights were the hardest. Lying awake, she'd stare at the ceiling, remembering how alone she felt in that hospital room. The recollection opened an old wound, stinging anew with each breath. Friends and family offered differing advice. Some told her to stand by her husband, to forgive and forget for the sake of the child. Others insisted she should leave him, claiming a leopard never changes its spots. But Victoria resisted outside pressures. She told them she would decide for herself, based on what she saw in Alexander's actions, not his words. As the months passed, a tentative rhythm formed. Alexander returned from work at reasonable hours. He accompanied Victoria on walks in Central Park with Aurora, pushing the stroller while she sipped coffee. They laughed occasionally at Aurora's giggles or at the odd shapes of clouds overhead. They developed a fragile peace, though the foundation remained cracked. One evening, Dr. Blackwood suggested a weekend retreat, a chance for them to leave the city and its distractions. They rented a modest cabin in the Catskills, far from paparazzi and the demands of Harrington Holdings. Without cell service, Alexander and Victoria were forced to connect with each other in the simplest ways, cooking together, taking quiet hikes along forest trails, gazing at stars in the clear night sky. With Aurora sleeping in a makeshift crib, they actually talked about their fears, their dreams, their past mistakes. Tears flowed, but so did small smiles and gentle touches. For the first time in a long while, Victoria saw a man who genuinely wanted to be better, who acknowledged his failings without justifying them. Alexander saw a woman who was determined and compassionate, yet rightfully guarded against further hurt. This was no neat, cinematic resolution. Pain still hovered in the background, and forgiveness was a precarious climb, yet the spark of genuine effort lit a path forward. Whether they could walk it successfully remained to be seen, but at least they weren't standing still, locked in silent torment. While Alexander and Victoria worked on repairing their marriage in relative seclusion, the outside world continued to buzz. Word of Alexander's affair had trickled into gossip sites and social media. A tabloid published blurry photos of him leaving Isabella's loft. Though no one had on record confirmation, speculation flared. Baby scandal in the Harrington dynasty. Society prince's perfect marriage on the rocks. The headlines were sensational and relentless. In the boardroom of Harrington Holdings, the scandal stirred unease. Alexander's father, Edward, had passed away years prior, but the board was populated with long-time associates who remembered his strict moral code regarding public image. Some worried that Alexander's personal failings would tarnish the company's sterling reputation. Others murmured that a messy divorce could spark legal complications over shares and assets. Alexander received a stern rebuke from his uncle, Harold Harrington, who served as chairman of the board. "We're not running a soap opera, Alexander," Harold said in a closed-door meeting. "Your father built this empire on respect and credibility. You've risked all of it by running around with that woman." The older man's brow furrowed deeply. "You need to handle this with the utmost discretion. Don't give the media any more ammunition." It was a harsh conversation, but it forced Alexander to confront the broader fallout of his choices. For so long, he'd lived under the myth that personal desires didn't affect professional realms. That illusion was shattered. If he truly wanted to preserve his father's legacy and stabilize his family life, he had to demonstrate consistent integrity. Meanwhile, Isabella Moretti was feeling the backlash of the scandal from her side too. Though discreet, many in her client base questioned her involvement in the controversy. A few projects were cancelled. Some of her professional peers whispered behind her back, mocking her as the millionaire's paramour. She faced financial stress and emotional anguish, often feeling remorseful for her role in the affair. Her once rising star in design circles began to dim under the weight of rumor and innuendo. For Victoria, the external drama reinforced her sense of betrayal. She endured pitying looks at social events, whispered gossip at charity luncheons, and invasive questions from reporters disguised as well-wishers. Every day she wrestled with a fundamental question. Could she rebuild a genuine future with Alexander, or was she merely delaying the inevitable? In therapy, Dr. Blackwood guided Victoria to understand that forgiveness didn't equate to forgetting, nor did it guarantee future happiness. It was a choice to release the burden of anger, but only if she felt safe and respected moving forward. Victoria wasn't there yet. She hovered in a middle ground, unwilling to finalize a divorce, yet equally hesitant to proclaim full reconciliation. Alexander didn't push her. He recognized the scale of the damage and knew trust couldn't be rushed. He focused on tangible steps, consistent honesty, fatherly devotion, unwavering presence at home. Over time, that might be enough, or it might not. The future lay uncertain, shaped by the consequences of his own making. Aurora's first birthday arrived, marking a year since the night that shattered Victoria's illusions. That night, a year ago, she labored alone, her husband absent at a table for two with his mistress. The memory still stung like salt on a wound, yet life had marched on, relentless and demanding attention. Victoria decided on a small celebration. She invited only close friends and family, wanting an intimate gathering that focused on Aurora rather than on public spectacle. The penthouse's grand living room was adorned with pink and gold balloons, a half-dozen pastel cakes from her favorite bakery, and a scattering of toys that Aurora joyfully banged around. As guests trickled in, there was a palpable warmth. Emma Castle arrived with gifts from upstate, Leonard Winston came bearing an adorable teddy bear nearly as big as Aurora. Even Harold Harrington managed to appear, though he was as formal and cautious as ever. For a day, the Harrington penthouse resembled a genuine family home rather than a gilded cage of secrecy. Aurora, curious and giddy, crawled around, occasionally pulling herself upright with the help of a table or a nearby adult. Each time she giggled, everyone lit up. It was a temporary respite from the undercurrents of tension. Victoria found herself watching Alexander throughout the day. He played the role of proud father perfectly, scooping Aurora into his arms, introducing her to relatives, and sneaking frosting from the cake with her. At times, Victoria felt a pang. Was this the man she'd fallen in love with, or was he merely performing a role for the crowd? Yet, the tenderness in his eyes when he looked at Aurora seemed genuine. He no longer carried the aloof distance that had haunted him before. In a private moment, Alexander and Victoria stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Below them, Manhattan pulsed with life, while inside, a new sort of calm held sway. "She's grown so much," Alexander murmured, nodding toward Aurora, who was being entertained by Leonard. Victoria nodded, silent for a moment. Then she spoke softly. "Thank you for being here. For being present, I mean." Alexander's gaze locked on hers, sincerity shining. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I know it might be too soon or too little, but I promise you, I'm trying to be the husband and father you both deserve." A lump rose in Victoria's throat, torn between fear of being hurt again and a cautious optimism. "I see that," she admitted. "I'm not ready to say everything is fine, but I'm willing to keep trying too." They stood there quietly, letting the moment speak. Sometimes progress is measured not by grand gestures but by small acknowledgements of effort. The fact that they could stand side by side, share a civil conversation, and celebrate their daughter's life together was a step forward, maybe not a leap, but a step all the same. No grand epiphanies, no sweeping romantic declarations. Life seldom offers neat endings. Yet, as time rolled on, Alexander and Victoria carved a path that defied easy labels. They continued therapy, kept open communication about fears and triggers, and most importantly centered Aurora in all decisions. Alexander worked diligently to mend the damage at Harrington Holdings. He introduced forward-thinking policies, engaged in philanthropic projects with genuine enthusiasm, and avoided any hint of scandal. Slowly he rebuilt respect among the board members. While some still eyed him with residual skepticism, they couldn't argue with the results of his projects or the steadiness of his public image. Isabella Moretti, for her part, faded from their immediate reality. She refocused on her design career, landed a smaller but respectable contract in Miami, and moved her base of operations there. Whatever lingering regrets she held, she kept to herself. She never reached out to Alexander again, nor did she respond to any of the salacious inquiries from the press. Perhaps she found her own path to healing, far from the limelight of Manhattan. For Victoria, the journey was about reclaiming her identity. She ventured back into conservation work, partnering with environmental charities that protected endangered species. She found a renewed sense of purpose in activism, channeling her pain into something meaningful. She and Alexander hosted a fundraiser for wildlife preservation, one of the first public events they attended side by side since the affair. The night ended up a resounding success, raising substantial funds and demonstrating a united front. Perhaps it was partially an image play, but in those hours, Victoria felt a spark of the old connection with Alexander. Meanwhile, Aurora grew from a cooing infant into a babbling toddler with wide eyes and an infectious laugh. She became the anchor around which both parents navigated their complicated relationship. Watching Aurora reach milestones, first steps, first words bonded them in ways that defied cynicism. The more they invested in Aurora's happiness, the more they found themselves learning to cooperate and share moments of genuine joy. Despite the fragile peace, Victoria kept her guard. Forgiveness, she learned, was not a destination but a process. It involved daily choices to let go of bitterness. Some days were easier, some days harder. Alexander supported her through the ups and downs, offering patience and reassurance. He made it clear he was no longer the man who shirked responsibility for fleeting thrills. Whether this transformation was permanent or not, only time could confirm. By the time Aurora was 2, the media storm had largely subsided. New York's gossip machine moved on to the next scandal. And in the Harrington household, the memory of betrayal had dulled from an acute knife wound to a healing scar. It still twinged sometimes, but it no longer dictated their every move. In the quiet after each day, when Aurora was tucked in, Alexander and Victoria often found themselves simply talking about the future, about lessons learned, about how to nurture not just their daughter, but a healthier love for each other. They weren't naive enough to believe that life was suddenly flawless. Yet, they had weathered a crisis that would have broken many marriages. They stood side by side, changed, scarred, and yet somehow hopeful. Love, trust, and heartbreak can coexist in complex ways, shaping the destinies of even the most privileged souls. In the harrowing journey of Alexander and Victoria Harrington, we see how betrayal can threaten to tear everything apart, yet also serve as a painful catalyst for reflection, redemption, and renewal. Ultimately, they chose to walk a rocky path toward forgiveness and understanding, forging a new kind of bond in the wake of shattering secrets. If this tale gripped you, sparked your emotions, or made you question the boundaries of loyalty and redemption, we invite you to join our community of thoughtful readers and viewers. Like this video, share it with friends who appreciate a gripping, true-to-life drama, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that delve deep into the human heart. Your support keeps these narratives alive and fuels our passion for storytelling. Thank you for being a part of this journey.